Well, we've showed you how we redid the Bose 901 suspensions, a typical age problem, and we've showed you about replacing capacitors in crossover networks in speaker LCR networks. But we haven't showed you what happens in the Bose. Obviously, there's no crossovers, no crossover components in the speaker. It's done electronically. It's one of the unique things about the 901. So 901 Series 4 active equalizer. And this one I've already started taking apart. There's 4 screws on the bottom. We'll take the 4 screws out, and then the knobs, they pull off. Pull the knobs off. And that way we can remove the circuitry from the wooden case. There we go. And the case, we'll take that off. Circuit board here, and it's not a bad piece of work. Now, I've already taken the screws out of here. There's about 6 screws. They're in the corners, and then there's one out in the middle. There's another one here, and you can see what we've got here in the way of capacitors here. Now we've got 2 big filter caps here, and then we've got 2, 4, 6, 8 electrolytics total. These are all the same value. These are all 10 microfarad, 35 volt, so they're all the same. We don't have to have a bunch of different caps. Now all these other caps, the film and foil caps, they're all still good. They're going to last a long time, and we're not going to change those out. We're just going to change out the electrolytics because they do time out. So once you take all the screws out of that board, the obstacle here is the power cord. So we just flex that case to get those up, and now just work that power cord around that board. Pull that up, and with the knobs off, it'll come right out. So that's pretty slick. Bose did good design work on this thing. Alright, so the 2 big caps, filter caps, and then 2, 4, 6, 10 microfarad caps. So it's easy enough to move the circuit board around. We don't really have to detach the AC cable. You can detach that if you want to make it a little bit easier. But so we'll see this 10 microfarad cap here. They have it labeled as C310. And another thing you notice on the board, every component is labeled, and your polarized markings right there. So that's going to be right there. Right now, if this might not be a bad project at all to start on if you're an amateur with a soldering iron. I know sometimes this can be intimidating to look at this kind of stuff, but let's take a quick look at desoldering this cap. Once again, if it's not marked, you always want to make note of the polarity, and you see the negative mark there. So if we didn't have the marking on here right now, we'd put a little mark right here to mark our negative side, just in case we had to put it down and come back later. But anyway, this is clearly marked, so we don't have to do that. So that's this pair right here. Now we got 2 main methods to desolder that cap. Solder braid comes in different widths. Of course, you can get a soldering iron that is a dedicated desoldering iron. There's various types, have different pumps attached to them. If you're going to do a lot of desoldering, it might help to invest in a desoldering iron. But in this case, we're just going to use a regular iron. Alright, this is the pair right here. It even has a positive mark even on this side of the board. So solder braid is one way to remove solder. We just put it on the contact. We hold our iron on it, and the braid sucks up all the solder. Alright, So the other way is to use a solder pump, a manual pump, spring loaded. Once again, we put our iron on, we get it hot, solder flowing, we pull it off, just like that. If you're desoldering and you're having a hard time pulling the component loose, then sometimes it helps to take a little bit of fresh solder and apply a little bit of fresh solder, and the acid in the solder will get the solder to flow, and then you can go ahead and pull it off with a braid or use the pump. So we're going to remove, look, that cap just fell right out. Okay, so we're gonna, and you see where it sits. Now we've got, fortunately, had these in inventory already, so didn't have to go looking for any. That's our negative mark, and notice also the negative lead is shorter. It's another way to tell. Positive over here, so negative obviously on the opposite side. We stab our cap like this, then we come around here and bend these a little bit so it doesn't go anywhere, and then once again we'll get our iron, we'll get our solder, lay that right on there just for a second, just till it starts to flow. Now this is a single layer board, we don't have to worry about the other side, but you'll see, especially newer stuff, you'll have dual trace boards and dual sided boards and multiple traces, and when you have dual sided boards you have to make sure that you leave it on long enough for the solder to flow through. Alright, so when we get that done, simple, clip these excessive lead links off here. Alright, so we're going to replace all those caps, and then we'll get around here to that one. Okay, we went into, we started putting caps in, and I was using the solder sucker like we showed before. I don't know if you can see the detail, but look here. When the solder sucker pulled the pad right off the board right there. Now see, there's one where the pad is complete, and the solder sucker just pulled the entire pad off. So on this board from now on, it's so delicate that I'll use the solder braid. I won't use the sucker anymore. But how do I fix this? Okay, so what I've done here is I took my X-Acto, and the pad is gone, but here's the trace, and you can see I've gently scraped away the insulation from the trace because we have no pad to work with. So now I'm going to take, I got my finger underneath holding the capacitor, and then I'm going to take this leg from this capacitor here, and I'm going to bend it up so I can clip it. But right there, I'm going to lay it right on that trace. I'm going to lay that leg right on there, and I'm going to solder that. Okay, now it's a delicate little operation there, and did I get a good joint on that trace? Did I get a good connection, a good solder joint? I gently tug on it, and it feels physically that I've got a good solder joint. So I'll go ahead and clip that lead out of the way. Okay, but now to be sure, what we're going to do, we don't want to go on through this and button it all up and then find out that one cap is not in the circuit. So we go with our ohm meter, and what we'll do is we'll tag onto this, the leg of the cap, and then we'll go to the next solder joint, which is right here. And there it is. So that's a good connection. And for the rest of the desoldering, this board turned out to be delicate where the pads just lift off. We'll use the solder braid as opposed to the solder sucker, so we don't do that again. Good. Alright, we've replaced all the electrolytic capacitors. Like I say, all these film and foil caps in here, they're good, they can stay. We've cleaned these switches and these faders here. And we used a spray cleaner on these because you need the spray to get inside of these switches and faders here. Now on the back, we're going to clean all these ins and outs. But to use a spray cleaner, which these are expensive cleaners, to spray here, it's, you know, you're throwing a lot of expensive cleaner away. So we have two choices: either the bottle with the needle, where you get right down in there and not waste it by spraying it all over the room, or they have another one, Deoxit D series here. This is the good stuff. This isn't D5, this is the 100. But because it has this little applicator, this little brush, we can get it right where it needs to be, and we don't waste it by squirting it all over the room. So clean the switches and the pots and clean the connectors, replace the electrolytic capacitors, and now we're ready just to put it all back together. And we've already refoamed the speakers, so recapped the EQ, cleaned it up, refoamed the speakers, and now you got a set of 901s that's ready to go for another 25 years. So.
And if you want to know how to refoam the speakers, just check out our refoam.